Welcome all to the GM Week 2021 elections debates. This year we'll be focusing on Grand Marshal, PU, and Undergraduate President, Grand Marshal, President Union, and Undergraduate President debates, which is a slight difference from tradition, where we have not included the Undergraduate President, but we did start it last year, so we'll be doing it this year as well. We will be having 40 minutes for each section, 10 questions, 2 minutes per each candidate for each question, with a 2-minute opening statement, or 2 minutes opening statement from each candidate. We will be starting with Grand Marshal, then heading into President of the Union, and finally with Undergraduate President. I, Keenan Adams, the Elections Commission Chairperson, will be moderating the Grand Marshal and President of the Union debates, and Evan Lazaro, the Undergraduate President, will be moderating the Undergraduate President debates. If you have any questions that you would like to ask the candidates at any point in time, please put so in the chat, as Evan Lazaro and myself will be looking at it. But let's begin. First, let's introduce all of our candidates. For Grand Marshal, we have Kate Bennett and Colleen Corrigan. For President of the Union, we have Yassine Mahoun. And for Undergraduate President, we have Harshal Patel and Rhea Banerjee. We'll be starting Grand Marshal. So if Kate, would you like to give an opening statement, please?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Kate Bennett, and I'm running to be your next Grand Marshal. I currently serve as the chairwoman of the Facilities and Services Committee, where we deal with a variety of issues, including public safety, transportation, and other forms of campus infrastructure. We currently have a few active projects, including safety diversification, campus accessibility, and the West Hall Garden Project. I was also elected to be an independent senator to serve 70% of the student body. I've championed causes such as expanding remote learning criterion and off-campus testing for students who are local but remote. I'm running to be your next Grand Marshal to use my administrative relationships, my passion, and my drive to propel the union forward. Thank you.
Colleen, would you like to give an opening statement?
Hi, my name is Colleen Corrigan, and I'm running for Grand Marshal. I'm a sister in Alpha Phi, and I've been in student government for over 3 years, and currently hold the position of Class of 2021 Senator, which I've held for 3 terms. I'm also the Vice Grand Marshal. My platform focuses on 5 key components: advocacy and student support, communication and collaboration, student rights, support for Greek initiatives, and inclusivity for underrepresented students.
All right, we'll just get started. So the first question is going to be for Colleen. And what part of your program is what part of your platform is the highest priority for you? You have 2 minutes.
Yes, so the highest priority on my platform is communication. Many students feel unheard, and this hurts the relationship between students and the administration. So I want to open communication up by bringing groups and individuals to the table to discuss issues and other aspects of campus that I myself may not be personally experiencing. And this can be done with meetings directly between me and these groups or individuals. But I'd also like to extend an invitation to meetings between myself and administrators so that these experiences can be directly conveyed and we can have a more, I guess, accurate conversation with these exact stories and experiences. So, for example, given the recent news with discrimination regarding the Asian community, I want to start by making more outreach to begin these conversations. I think this is something really important, and I don't think enough has been done currently to start that. So I'd like to have myself personally reach out to these organizations, but also talk to the administration about this because they can directly make change on campus.
All right, Kate. Thank you, Colleen. Let's ask the same question to you, Kate. What part of your platform is the highest priority for you?
I think the highest priority in both the short term and the long term has to do with student representation. First of all, to the administration, I think that we currently have no representation on the Board of Trustees, and the GM and PU only have a very short time to express the issues that students are facing to the Board of Trustees. And I think that expanding upon that time and eventually being able to stand as members of particular student life committees, that would be really valuable going forward. That is more of a long-term goal. I think that the student representation to their student leaders is equally important. In particular, I think it'd be very important to have the multicultural Electoral Leadership Council be a joint committee with the E-Board and the Senate. Conversations about racism and social injustice are happening at Rensselaer, and they're not happening in the chief legislative body of the union. So encouraging those conversations and listening to them as they're happening is vital to encourage that, to make sure that student leaders are fundamentally representing their constituencies.
All right, thank you, Kate. The next question will begin with Kate. What would you keep from the last couple of Senates, and what would you change?
So I really appreciate Advait's flexibility with the pandemic. That is something I would like to keep. In particular, the structure of different committees and basically setting things up so that students can participate even if they're not able to attend certain meetings. That is something I really appreciate, and I think that the rest of the student body appreciates it as well. Additionally, I would like to keep a very strong presence in advocacy and focus on what students are affected by, rather than kind of coming up with some sort of way to appease administrators. It's focused on making sure that students feel like their concerns and their voices are being heard. I would definitely change the extent to which we train future leadership. I think that there are some resources available to help students when they want to work on a project, when they want to take initiative, but I do think that those resources are limited. So I think it's important for the next Grand Marshal and the next Student Senate to focus heavily on finding those kind of bits of passion within the Rensselaer community and kind of working upon them, providing them with the proper resources so that they can actually accomplish their particular goals.
All right, thank you, Kate. I'll repeat the question for Colleen. What would you keep from the last couple of Senates, whether 51st or before, and what would you change?
I think this past Senate has been especially passionate in supporting their constituents and caring about issues around campus. And I'd also love to keep the subcommittee structure that we have to focus on projects for committees. It allows flexibility because each person can focus directly on a project that they're interested in or multiple. And I think it helps with managing how projects work, because if there's something holding up one, it doesn't stop others from being interfered with. But that also ties in with expanding committee membership. So that's something I'd like to change. I'd like to get more students and more voices in Senate. I also want to change the relationship that senators have with their class councils. I think many councils want to focus more on advocacy. So I'd like to see more discussions between senators and their councils about issues on campus and possible aspects that they'd like to see in a solution. Class councils are made up of representatives and others which are also elected and should serve as representatives. I also think multiple groups have been working on similar projects throughout student government. So by opening up this communication, it can allow for more collaboration and like other efforts for these efforts to be centralized. And another big part of my platform is for senators to be proactive rather than reactive. So I want senators to remember that it's not just a title. Like senator is not just a title for Senate and committee meetings, but it's a position that's held 24/7. So whenever a senator is talking to friends or other students and an issue on campus comes up, that issue should be reported directly to the Senate or a committee chair or myself if I'm elected, so that we can start working on it right away and we don't have to wait for it to become a petition or for it to become a bigger thing than it already is. We can start from the beginning and open up those conversations.
All right, thank you, Colleen. For this next question, we'll start with Colleen. Compare your leadership style with that of the current GM, Advait Narayan.
Yeah, so the current Grand Marshal Advait Narayan is extremely passionate, and he's very independent. He will go ahead and work on projects by himself, and he can get a lot done that way, but at the same time, not as much as he probably could if he had others helping him. My leadership style is more collaborative. So when situations allow, I like to take the time to discuss projects and issues and like flesh out the full scope from with different people's perspectives. And this goes along with the communication and collaboration part of my platform. Because I want to ensure that groups on campus feel that they're being supported and listened to by their elected leaders.
All right, thank you, Colleen. I'll be asking the same question to you, Kate. Could you compare your leadership style with that of the current GM, Advait Narayan? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that Advaith is definitely a very passionate leader. He is very strong and doesn't stand down when he believes in something. That's something that I also believe in and something that I would absolutely like to continue with going forward if I were elected. Additionally, I do think that sometimes he struggles with delegation. As FSC chair, I have worked really hard in how to train other leaders and how to basically encourage people to go forth with their own projects, even if I am not personally involved in them. I think that that's really important because not only are you accomplishing something as an individual, but you're not just imparting an accomplishment on somebody, but you're imparting skills upon somebody. And that's what we need to work on within student government. So I think that one of Advaith's major flaws is the fact that he focuses much less on delegation and would rather just focus on the end result, whereas I would like to continue training student leadership and training just students who have individual project ideas using the experience that I have as a committee chair.
All right, thank you. The next question is, we'll be starting with you as well, Kate. And how will you balance between student needs and administrative needs?
Yeah, this is a complicated question. I do think that within student government, we get really caught up in this dichotomy of, either you are a very strong student leader, you voice student concerns, or you are kind of appeasing the administrative needs and whatever they would like. I don't think that that's necessarily a dichotomy that's real. Personally, I have had plenty of situations where I've gone to administrators and I've said, hey, you really messed something up, but here's what you can do in the future to fix it. That part of honest but fair criticism is something that's missing for most administrative relationships. In fact, I would argue that it's vital to allow people the opportunity to fix upon their previous mistakes, and that's not something that we frequently do with administrators. It is important for us to provide them with criticism and not back down, while also making sure that we're coming to the table with an open mind. This is something I experienced as a part of the remote learning extensions. As we began, it was something where I told them, this was something that students are upset about, and students are going to continue to be upset about if you don't fix it. To fix it, you should expand the criteria to include financial situations, academic situations, etc. That feedback was received well, and it didn't result in an administrative shutdown, but rather it resulted in those criterion being extended.
All right, thank you, Kate. Colleen, I'll be asking you the exact same question. How will you balance between student needs and administrative needs?
Yeah, so I understand that the administration has its own needs and focuses, but if I'm elected, I'm responsible for the students and our goals and not the administrators. I think in order to make progress, we should work towards small steps that can lead to the bigger objectives. So an example of this is one of the projects I worked on this year, which was to implement wellness days to alleviate student stress in regards to not having a spring break. And I talked originally with the administration about this and the provost, and it was decided that because of the tight schedule that the semester has, it wouldn't be possible to add days off because there are a certain number of credit hours required. So instead of, I guess, wasting time in conversation with administration, I found an alternative solution. I worked with the faculty senate in order to have unofficial days off decided by individual professors and departments. And since then, this has benefited many students. I've heard a lot of feedback about this. So I'm looking forward to working with the administration and continuing to collaborate so that we even though the administration might have their own goals, I still think we should keep students should keep pushing for theirs. And I'm looking to keep pushing and finding alternative routes so that we can meet our end goals.
All right. The next question will be starting with you as well, Colleen. Thank you. What would you be your greatest weakness as Grand Marshal?
I think my greatest weakness is that I don't like working with vague topics or ideas. I like to clearly define the problem and figure out the scope of a situation. And I think this is important because you may leave out aspects that are important to a situation. And I like to make sure that through this process of questioning and defining that others that are involved are also on the same page and understand that full scope. And this goes again with the collaboration part of my platform, because I think it's important to have other students' voices and input. I don't want to be the sole voice. I think it's important that I am representing to the best of my ability every student and every group on campus.
Thank you, Colleen. Kate, I'm going to ask you the same question. What would be your greatest weakness as Grand Marshal?
Yeah, so I'm naturally a very ambitious person, and while it has its strengths in the sense that I'm definitely the type of person to go for something and push really hard, it also has its weaknesses because sometimes my ideas are a little bit too over the top. Sometimes the methods that I go about them can result in people feeling like overwhelmed or annoyed. So I definitely work very hard to surround myself with folks who are more on the realistic side rather than the optimist side and say, okay, maybe it's insane to put a Ferris wheel on top of the Beeman Park, but here's what you can do instead that accomplishes a very similar goal. And that's how I learned to slowly develop this like step-by-step process and say, instead of shooting for let's get on the board of trustees, we'll start step by step and say, okay, first we're gonna ask for a couple more minutes to talk about each student issue. And then we're going to ask to come to more meetings, and then eventually we can kind of build up there. So I think that one of my weaknesses is that I do tend to think very big picture and sometimes go way too far into the future.
All right. Thank you, Kate. I'm going to start with you again, Kate, for this next question. What is the biggest issue that the student body faces now, and how will you address it?
Yeah, right now I think the biggest issue that students are facing is COVID-19, not surprisingly. This pandemic has really caused so many students to suffer, especially within the categories of mental health. Currently, about 1/3 of people in the United States are experiencing some form of mental health issues resulting from this pandemic, and students are no exception to that. We recently had a very long Senate meeting in which over 180 people came, and multiple students talked about the fact that they were feeling overwhelmed and stressed from the quarantines and from not being able to see people. So I do think that that is the biggest issue currently facing students. To focus on the mental health issues, I'd first like to talk about the kind of high level what we can do to fix it after the fact, and that comes from the counseling center. Currently, we are severely understaffed in the counseling center. Students get 30 minutes a week to talk about something that's important to them. That is not going to be enough to help students who are sincerely struggling with mental health problems. So I believe that we need to hire more staff in the counseling center to account for this increased demand while also preventing the students from not being able to have enough time to talk about these issues. But there's also the underlying cause of academic stress combined with pandemic stress leading to this overall mental health issue. So I think that firstly, following within the footsteps of other institutes and reopening with COVID-safe procedures, things like the Mueller Center and Spring Sports that we have just recently started reopening, I would like to continue along that path of a slow but steady reopening with COVID-safe procedures. I would also like to make sure that students don't feel too overwhelmed by the academic stresses of the pandemic. While the pandemic did not end, the pass-fail regulations of spring 2020 did end, and professors went right back to things as normal, business as usual. So I think it's important to start addressing those causes, the root cause of academic stress, and basically look for alternative ways for professors to support their students during this time.
All right. Thank you, Kate. I'm going to ask the same question for you, Colleen. What is the biggest issue that the student body faces now, and how will you address it?
Yeah, so I think the biggest issue we have right now has been a problem during my time at RPI for the last few years, and that is that there's a lack of unity among students and student groups. I think in the past year, given the environment we're in, we've seen small portions of what it would look like if we had that unity and the goals that we've been able to accomplish. Like Kate talked about, we had a Senate meeting with over 180 students. That is huge. I've never experienced that in my time on Senate, and I think that's great, and I'd love to continue seeing that going forward. And that starts with students supporting students. So I want to create a coalition of students that can support each other's initiatives. And one way to do this is on my platform. One of my goals is that I want to hold open forums so that I can focus on specific constituents or other current issues on campus, so we can increase communication and this unity among students. I think this is super important, especially when we work with the administration, to have that united front and to like go forward when we're dealing with any issue. We know that we have support from all students around campus. And I think that's the biggest issue right now.
All right. Thank you, Colleen. As a follow-up question regarding based on what you both have just said, Kate, what do you think about the issue of unity being the biggest issue of students on campus?
Yeah, I definitely agree that that's a very big issue. I think that it is a very long-term issue that won't necessarily be solved within one person's term or even 2 or 3 different terms of Grand Marshal. It's something that has stemmed from really generations of our PI students slowly feeling, slightly isolated and fewer resources being available, changes in the administration. All of that has slowly culminated to this bigger issue of student unity. So I definitely agree that student unity is a huge problem. I think that COVID-19 is a more urgent and current problem that we should be addressing at the moment.
All right, thank you, Kate. Colleen, what do you think about COVID-19 as a student issue?
Yeah, I think it's a very specific issue at this moment. Most of the problems that we've had on Senate right now have been focused on issues that have come because of COVID. But I think many of the petitions that we've talked about in Senate and like other issues have come because students have worked together to bring those problems to the attention of Senate, or the Senate has worked together with other groups. And that's why I think unity is so important, because it can solve more than just one issue. Um, because COVID is an issue, like it obviously is. And like going forward, I want to ensure that we have a plan of action of how to deal with each part, because we're still in the middle of it and we haven't transitioned out of it yet. So I want to ensure like the Senate can deal with COVID, but that is one specific issue like right now that I think like we can go beyond just that.
All right, let's start with Kate for this next question. There are parts of both of your platforms, actually, correction, my apologies. If elected, what would have to get done for you to consider your term as Grand Marshal to be successful? Thank you.
Right. I have a couple of particular success metrics in my head. I definitely acknowledge that as Grand Marshal, there are a ton of different things and topics pulling in each direction. I think that the first primary goal of considering my term a success would be that the student leaders around me feel comfortable and confident that if I leave and I'm gone and there's no Grand Marshal, they still feel comfortable advocating for themselves and feel like they have the resources and skills to advocate to administrators as well as to complete whatever projects they're looking forward to in the future. That's first of all. I think secondly, I would like to implement some of the demands put forth by RBLX within my term. This is something that's very, very important to me because it has been procrastinated for so long by the Institute. Certain things the Student Senate itself can actually implement, like implicit bias training, but we also have the Counseling Center, and the Counseling Center survey is something that the Student Senate handles every single year. And we should be recommending and encouraging the Counseling Center to hire more Black and Latinx counselors to address the needs of those particular students. So that is something that I view as very urgent and pressing that has been procrastinated for far too long, considering that these demands were put out almost a year ago. And finally, I would like to implement a composting program within the Institute as a whole. This is, again, something that's been procrastinated for quite a while. We had a budding project within the Student Senate, and it just kind of got dismissed with the change in leadership and administration. So moving forward, I would like to implement that going forward to make sure that RPI can be a more sustainably focused campus. And the long-term goals that I have align more with the, enabling the future of Senate leadership to accomplish these crazy big goals, like getting a seat on the Board of Trustees, the stuff that won't just be accomplished in only my term.
All right, thank you. Colleen, I'll ask you the same question. If you're elected, what would have to get done for you to consider your term as Grand Marshal to be successful?
Yeah, so I could like list off like parts of my platform that I want to work towards and I'd love to see done, such as the hiring of a Greek dean, deadlines for institute decisions, and smooth transitions back to an in-person semester as we like move out of the COVID-19 situation. But I think the most important aspect would be for students to feel supported, and this goes back to the unity. I don't want students to like be told that they're supported. I want them to actually feel it, both from the administration and from the Senate. So I think I would consider myself to have a successful term if I, at the end of my term, or even like in the middle, because I want to start this with training right away. I want to see senators going out and taking initiative on projects like it shouldn't just be whatever project we're working on in this committee at this moment. It should be if you see something on campus and you want to start like with that, go for it. Like if you're in your dorm and a lot of students are talking about how this situation can benefit campus and you think it's worthwhile, like definitely take that. I don't want it to be like we're all leaders on Senate, and I don't want it to just be like this one core group of people who's making all the decisions. Like I think there's a lot more room to grow and expand and to get this work done, and that's where I'd like to see Senate go, and not just through like motions. I want to move more towards tangible action. I want to see senators take a project to their committee chair and be like, "Hey, I have this great idea. Do you think this is possible? Like, do we have the resources and would we be able to complete this?" And I think that would be great for students because if students are seeing this initiative being taken and I want it to be like reported through like the Student Government Communications Committee, like I want students to be updated on what the Senate is currently doing and any actions we're taking. Because if we're being active and we're reporting on that, then students can feel that. And I also want to like work with the administration. A lot of the topics on my platform talk about different ways the administration can help students, and I think those are just ways that students can feel that support. I think right now we're just told by the institute, "Hey, we're supporting you, we're here for you." But if you don't feel that, then it's not important.
All right. Thank you, Colleen. This next question, I'm going to start with Kate as well. There are parts of both of your platforms which are buzzwordy, quote unquote, like student presence on Board of Trustees Committee on Kate's platform and implementing deadlines for institute decision announcements on Colleen's platform, as you have both mentioned. These are things which countless GMs have been working on for years, but we've yet to see these issues actually resolved. What will you do differently to make sure these issues are solved?
Yeah, so one of the very important things that I've learned throughout my time as a committee chair is that oftentimes if you set a really big lofty goal, it's not going to fully get accomplished. But if you break that goal down into smaller steps and say, okay, step one is going to be writing a report on this. Step two is going to be, implementing one solution, so on and so forth. That is how you accomplish some of these really big buzzwordy goals that folks have been working on for years. So within my platform, a long-term goal that I hope arises from my term as GM is that we restore this presence of the student body on the Board of Trustees. However, breaking that down, right, we start off with asking for more time to speak to them about student issues. 5 minutes is not enough to summarize every issue that all students are facing across the campus for an entire year. Asking for more time is step one. Then step two is pushing just one little baby step forward in the right direction. And that's going to be, asking to come to multiple meetings and talk multiple different times about different issues facing students, and so on and so forth, until eventually it's a small step that brings us towards this big lofty goal of getting student presence back on the Board of Trustees. So I think that the key with all of these big buzzwords, these big goals that have been pushed for by GM after GM, is really to break it down and make a very clear process that folks after you feel comfortable following and feel comfortable pushing for. Again, I think that the more specific a goal is, the more likely it is to get accomplished. Following that whole SMART goal paradigm that people learn about is vitally important in cases like this when you're dealing with these really, really big issues.
All right. Thank you, Kate. Colleen, I'll be asking the same question. There are parts of both of your platforms which are buzzwordy, quote unquote, like student presence on Board of Trustees Committee on Kate's platform and implementing deadlines for institute decision announcements on your platform. These are things which countless GMs have been working on for years, but we've yet to see these issues actually resolved. What will you do differently to make sure these issues are solved?
Yeah, to start, like I think these are big issues, and I think this goal isn't any less important, or it should be stopped just because it's an ongoing issue that, while it has been like tried to be fixed in the past, may not be at a solution yet. So for this specific issue of implementing deadlines, well, I think like past grand marshals have tried working with administration. It wasn't necessarily a focus, or if it was, it became a pretty large problem before it was discussed within the Senate. So, for example, we had a discussion regarding the remote decisions back in like mid to late December last semester. And in one of our motions, one of the resolves was to have a deadline. And I believe that deadline was only a week or two after we had set it, which isn't a lot of time to start having that kind of conversation. So I want to start thinking about these issues beforehand and start working on them now. So like, for example, for the Arch semester, housing is an issue that's basically being discussed right now within the Arch Task Force committee. And I want to make sure, like, we're a few months out now, but it's super important to start talking about that now and pushing the administration to have a set date for when the housing application will go out, or for when decisions will be made for whether students can stay in their rooms like over the small break. And these are important conversations that we should be starting early. So while I think like past GMs have tried to implement these kind of deadlines, it wasn't necessarily a main focus. Like I'm focusing specifically on this being a problem and not like a specific event of it happening.
All right, thank you, Colleen. I'm going to ask a follow-up question regarding both of what your questions. So, Colleen, I'm going to ask you again a variation. So, Kate is pushing for a fundamentalist approach in regards to this, of breaking things down into their simplest solutions and working through that. Uh, what would be the pros and cons of combining that with your proactive approach?
I think they go hand in hand. I am so my future career is going to be within project management. That's the goal I'm going for. And within project management, the whole process of it is the steps that you take to arrive to a goal, and kind of those checkpoints and those milestones, and working to ensure that your team is meeting those steps. So I think Kate's take on it is super important. I think it goes hand in hand, because while like I have this goal, I can't just say let's have these deadlines. Like I need to make those small steps and changes in order to get there.
All right, thank you, Colleen. I'm going to ask a modified question of that to you, Kate. How do you think that your approach of being fundamentalist will combine with Colleen's proactive approach? Thank you.
Yeah, I think a good amount of it definitely echoes what Colleen has been talking about the ways that they connect. I do think something that Colleen brought up that was very valuable is this idea that just because a goal doesn't get accomplished immediately doesn't mean that we shouldn't be talking about it. I think something I've seen happen by kind of looking at the trends of past GMs is that, you know, if somebody doesn't speak out about a particular issue within their platform, it's not going to get talked about maybe the next year, right? That's something that's really important to look to. One example of this that I personally saw was the preferred name scenarios when it comes to SIS and LMS. For those of you who don't know, to change your name on SIS and LMS, it's a very complex process, and I'm pretty sure it requires you currently to change your own, you have to go through the administration, and it takes multiple different months. So that whole process is very complicated, and basically Justin Etzine as well as Steph Warner had talked about basically improving that process within their platforms. The GM after them, Megan, didn't talk about it in as much depth, and then it kind of just got dropped after time, and it was something that Senate stopped focusing on. So I definitely agree with Colleen that even if an issue cannot be immediately addressed and it needs to get addressed over the long term, it absolutely should still be something that's included within a platform, and that we continue talking about so that it doesn't just kind of get brushed off and pushed to the side.
All right, thank you, Kate. This next question, I'm going to begin again with Colleen. More than the technical know-how of the Senate and the Union, a successful GM needs to be a great leader and tactful communicator. There are ample opportunities to slip up if acting hastily or getting exceedingly carried away with a certain issue at hand. How will you ensure that you will maintain a level head to make good decisions in your communications to ensure that any mistakes won't end up costing the student body?
Yeah, so I've been in meetings with administrators and others, including Senate meetings, where the conversations have gotten heated. And I don't think that's productive at all. And I think it hurts relationships. Instead of arguing, I think we can convey how students feel, and have like the administration like show empathy for us and understand like our situation, which is why I want to bring in like people to conversations, so that they can convey like their experiences and like tell their stories from their perspective, so that the full extent of the scenario can be heard. But when making decisions, I personally consider things from all angles, whether that be from different groups of students or from the side of the administrators. And I also think something that's really important, if time allows, is to expand the perspective, to include even more input from members of the Senate as well as other students. I think that's the best way to communicate, is by learning and gaining that experience for all sides, because I specifically know my side, and all I can do is learn others. And continue to do that. And I think by seeing it from my perspective, from others' perspectives, from the administrator's perspective, I can keep a level head because I understand. And I think empathy and understanding is super important when you're dealing with these like campus-wide issues.
All right. Thank you, Colleen. Kate, I'll be asking you the same question. I'll be repeating it. More than the technical know-how of the Senate and the Union, a successful Grand Marshal needs to be a great leader and tactful communicator. There are ample opportunities to slip up if acting hastily or getting exceedingly carried away with a certain issue at hand. How will you ensure that you will maintain a level head to make good decisions in your communications to ensure that any mistakes won't end up costing the student body? Thank you.
So within my own personal life and my own personal communications, I'm definitely a fan of taking a moment to take a deep breath. If we are in a situation where administration, I feel like is overwhelming, or they're saying something I don't agree with, or anything like that, I definitely have been in situations like that. And the key for me, and the key that I tell other people as well, is just to take a second, take a deep breath, and think of something funny, you know, like a meditation type thing, basically. But I definitely believe in maintaining honesty. There have been situations where administrators have interrupted me, and I've never been aggressive about it, but I'm also not going to allow it to happen necessarily. So, you know, making sure that you have kind of these calm, pre-prepared statements in your head of, I was talking, could you please let me finish, is something that is fair and not rude, but it also prevents you from being walked over in those types of situations when things get heated. I also think a really fundamental part of this discussion is preventing things from getting so heated in the first place. A lot of the core issues that have resulted in student administrator tension come from the fact that there's some sort of miscommunication, there's some sort of instance where the administration make a decision that hurts students without telling them. Particularly what comes to mind is the peace officer bill, where they lobbied for this bill to allow the public safety officers to become peace officers without telling students. I firmly believe that a lot of that anger and a lot of the upset about it was the fact that they didn't consult the student body beforehand. I think a good amount of that heated discussion could be completely avoided if there was just that enhanced communication prior to the event. So I think that it's inherently related to have a GM who is proactively communicating, who's going to the administrators and asking questions about issues that haven't even come up yet. Like, how are we going to have our PI students get vaccinated? Are we going to get shuttles or to send them to Albany or something like that? Those types of questions, right? So they come up well in advance, and then we don't get those crazy heated discussions happening in Senate or amongst the students and the administrators.
All right. Thank you. Now we'll begin with student questions, including some questions that were asked in a Google form from an email a couple days ago, as well as a question that was asked in the YouTube chat. The first question, let's begin with Kate. What is something you admire about your opponent, Colleen?
I think that Colleen is very calm and put together. She is really great at managing a ton of different things happening at the same time. Being vice GM requires her to kind of have a knowledge of what's going on in each different committee. So I definitely admire the fact that she is able to kind of have, you know, 10 different trains of thought happening, 10 different things that she has to focus on, and she's still kind of staying on top of all of them.
All right, thank you. Colleen, the same question. What is something you admire about your opponent, Kate?
Yeah, I think Kate's great. I mean, she became involved in Senate because of an issue on campus. So she is super passionate about, you know, issues and helping students. Like, I remember she came because it affected her, but that expanded to helping more students with the same issue. I think it was regarding it became the peace officer bill, but before that, it was like I think it was a SWAT team we had on campus. Um, and besides that, like, she quickly got a leadership role, and she was able to take her committee, which had a lot of new members, and kind of train them into future leaders.
All right, thank you. Now here is a question that was asked in the chat, and I will ask it for the sake of time. Colleen, what is your favorite color?
Okay, that's a hard question. Right now I'm kind of feeling a little purple, so I'm gonna go with that.
All right, and Kate, what is your favorite color?
Green! I really like trees and stuff and flowers. I'm a little bit of a tree hugger, you know, but in a good way.
All right, thank you. While we wait for any other questions that might hop up in the chat, I'm going to be asking one other question. The GM and PU have the same office, and they work in very close proximity, as well as the undergraduate president, the rest of the student leaders. How will you work together with the president of the union candidate or whoever is elected for that position? And Kate, let's start with you.
Yeah, so Yassine and I obviously are not running mates. However, I've definitely had lots of experiences with him within his role in student government in the past. In particular, one of the things that Yassine I think he talked about within his platform, and something that he is deservedly proud of, is the fact that the student government, not student government, sorry, the union rather, didn't have any tampons or pads within the female bathrooms. And that was an issue that I had posted on Reddit and on one of my older freshman year accounts, and I was upset about it, and I posted it on Reddit. It was not a part of student government at the time, and Yassine responded saying, "Okay, yeah, the Biz Ops committee is gonna buy tampons and pads for the bathrooms, and those tampons and pads are still out there." So I think I've definitely worked with him in the past, and I appreciate that he is a strong advocate for students. He keeps an eye on all of these different forums, as many student issues as he can, and he actively thinks to himself, here's a problem someone's bringing up. I didn't actually ask for a solution, me personally, in the Reddit thread, but he thought to himself, how can I use my power as a student leader to develop a solution for this student? So that's something I really appreciate about him, and I definitely think that we would work very well going forward.
Right. Thank you, Kate. Colleen, the same question. How would, as the Grand Marshal and President of the Union work closely together in the same office, how will you work together with the President of the Union candidate or whoever is elected?
Yeah. So I remember not too long ago, the relationship between Senate and E-Board wasn't the best. But I think over the last few years, we've come a really long way. And I think that relationship is super beneficial because the two bodies do a lot together and a lot of issues go between both of them. So it's great to have like student government working together to help with these issues. And I've worked with Yassine in the past, and I think it's super important that we keep up that relationship, especially like it's become more of a thing in recent years where the president of the union and the grand marshal will like co-write either an article for the Poly or an important letter to students. And I think just having that kind of like show of unity goes back to like my whole conversation about how unity among students is super important. So if I'm elected, I'm looking forward to continuing to work with Yassine and making sure that Senate and E-Board are also working together.
All right. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Colleen. Thank you for joining us all and everyone. We'll be moving on to the President of the Union debates or questions with Yassine in about a minute. All right. Or 30 seconds. This is just a reminder because I didn't mention in the past, in the beginning. Elections start Thursday, tomorrow at 9 in the morning, all the way through Saturday at 9 in the morning. Do remember to vote, everybody. Vote for the candidates you see here, as well as candidates that are listed on the elections website. But let's get started with the President of the Union questions. Yassine, what does the role of President of the Union mean to you?
So I think being president of the union or grand marshal or UP is about making sure that you're representing students to the best of your ability, and any decision that you make should be made with the knowledge that you are representing the student body and you are serving your constituents. So it really comes down to making sure you're advocating for the students that elected you and making sure that you're doing everything in their best interests, even if it's not the easiest decision or even if it's not going to be the most popular decision for you as PU or as GM or as UP.
All right. Thank you, Yassine. The next question is, what would you keep from the past executive boards and what would you change?
Yeah, so I think the past executive boards, I've been on the past 3 executive boards, and I think what we've started to see is we've seen a lot more communication with clubs. I think e-board reps as a whole have been in contact with their clubs much more in the past couple of years than they have been in years prior, and I think that's excellent. And I really want to make sure that that isn't something that's lost and that's something that's maintained. Something we could do better is definitely openly communicating. I know communication has been kind of a recurring issue, but I think it's really important that we are, as PU, I'm communicating with my VPs and with my cabinet, and as a board as a whole, we are coming back and we're informing the student body of what actions we're taking and why, and we're making sure that we're really including everyone in those in that decision-making process.
All right. Thank you, Yassine. The next question is, What would be your biggest weakness as president of the union?
I think I have a tendency to be a little too headstrong sometimes. So I think that that could definitely be an issue. I'm definitely going to rely on my VPs and my cabinet to kind of mellow me out a little bit and make sure that I'm kind of taking everything into consideration before making a move. I'm very very result oriented, so I want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can right away. And I think it's really important to just take a step back and look at the issue and plan before I kind of go and do.
All right, thank you. A couple of questions ago, you mentioned clubs. As you mentioned in your platform that you'd like to see clubs having in-person events, as this is now the case, as from an email from a couple of weeks ago or last week actually. How do you further plan on helping clubs other than your 3 goals regarding clubs in your platform statement?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is going to be recruitment and retention. We know that that's been a recurring issue since COVID started. You really don't get the same interpersonal connections that you would get during a normal year, and I think that clubs and Greek organizations as a whole have really suffered from that. So I think going forward, we're going to have a very good opportunity to market our clubs and our Greek organizations and improve not only to the level we were at this time 2 years ago, but far beyond that, because I think there's been a year where the freshmen and the sophomores haven't had the ability to join clubs and find out what clubs they like and what clubs are related to their hobbies or what Greek organizations they're interested in. So I think because of that, they're going to be much more willing to try things that they might not have been willing to try if they were freshmen or sophomores 2 years ago. So I think it's really going to be important that we make sure that we're marketing those clubs well and we're supporting our clubs and giving them an opportunity to kind of show what they're about and get people interested and gain members and keep members.
All right, thank you, Yassine. My next question regarding your time as an EMT. You worked full time as an EMT while holding e-board positions. Do you plan on doing so if elected? And how will you balance your time if so?
Yeah, so I'll definitely continue doing it. I mean, it's definitely a personal passion of mine. In years past, I was working up to 80 hours a week on top of 21 credits. I definitely won't be doing that. I don't honestly think that that was very great for my mental health, even if I didn't realize it at the time. And I don't know that that really led to the best outcomes with regard to my education and my work in student government. So while I would continue that work, certainly, I think I would definitely kind of scale it back to a more manageable amount and kind of base it more off of my mental health and my ability to succeed and serve the student body.
All right. Well, thank you first and foremost for being a first responder and for being an EMT. That is such an amazing job. Thank you. But to continue a little bit more regarding a follow-up question regarding that, how would you take your experience working as an EMT or on the past couple of e-boards and putting it towards what you're working as the president of the union if you're elected?
Yeah, so I think one of my biggest goals outside of helping clubs rebuild is making sure that we have the foundation of good health and safety initiatives on campus. And the way that I intend to do that is not only through increasing access to AEDs and first aid kits and trauma kits and all of those things, but working with the Grand Marshal to make sure that we can improve union events for mental health and the counseling center as a whole, and making sure that we have access to all of those mental and physical well-being kind of safety nets throughout campus and not just in the union or not just under my purview as PU.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to ask the next question, the same question I asked both GM candidates. As you work closely as the GM and President of the Union share an office in the union and have to work in close proximity with other student leaders and themselves, how do you plan on working closely with whomever is elected as GM?
Yeah, so I think I've worked fairly extensively with Kate and Colleen both. I think I have a good relationship with both of them, and honestly, no matter who wins, I'm willing to work with them and I'm ready to work with them. And I think we'll definitely be able to get stuff done and we'll definitely be able to communicate actively and collaborate and kind of be that kind of power leadership structure that you want to see in a GM and PU. So I really don't see an issue with working with either of them, and I'm really excited to kind of get started.
All right. Thank you. So this next one is going to be a specific question about your platform. Your platform mentions that you will ensure that social media policies are codified and added to the Rensselaer Union Guidelines and Procedures, the RUGP. There are already some social media guidelines in the RUGP already. So how do you plan on building upon the policies already in place, as mentioned?
Yeah, so the social media policy as a whole kind of started earlier this year, working with Min as SGCC chair. So we kind of tried to lay out kind of best practices for social media, both for the union and for clubs. I really want to expand upon that and kind of outline not only best practices, but kind of tips and tricks. So I think in addition to making sure that we have specific policies for, oh, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, I want to work on making an actual brand guideline. So if I'm a club officer and I want to market my club, I don't have to worry about what color I want to make the ad or what font I want to use or what union logo I want to use or anything like that. I can just go to this policy and say, oh, it mentions this brand guideline. It's right here. I can look at it and I can see, oh, I can use Union Red, which is this color. These are good supporting colors. I can use this font. I can use this logo, et cetera, et cetera. So I really want to not only kind of create rules or policies that can help clubs to kind of make sure that they're following the union constitution and the institute rules, but also kind of simplify the process of marketing for clubs and organizations.
All right, thank you. You actually answered my follow-up question for me. So the next question is, in your platform, you mentioned petitioning and denouncing the RPI administration. How do you plan to improve the union in both facilities improvements and club activities with this type of interaction with the admins?
Yeah, so I don't know that denouncing is necessarily the best word. I think kind of holding administrators accountable is more of a communication goal than it is kind of a name and shame goal. I definitely don't think that denouncement is a good first step, and I don't think that that's going to be one of the first steps that I'm going to take. I think the biggest thing that I want to work on is having open communication with campus administrators and working with them to make sure that the student body is aware of what actions and what decisions they're making, and then going from there. So I don't think that it necessarily has to be adversarial. I think sometimes it can be, and it might end up being. That's definitely not my go-to, and that's definitely not what I want to focus on. I definitely want to work on having that communication and having those working relationships.
All right, thank you. To no, uh, so in your opinion, what has been the most impactful initiative you have led in your time at RPI, and what are its lasting effects on the student body?
Yeah, so I think the largest isn't even necessarily something that's finished. I think when I was vice chair of the business operations committee, myself, Ben Volk, who was the chair at that time, and Dr. Potts all started talking about first floor renovations for the union. Obviously, we haven't done any renovations yet. We just kind of laid the groundwork, and the business operations committee from this year has been expanding upon that. I think in the coming months, when we kind of start to get funding and we start to do those projects, that's going to have the largest lasting effect on the student body, because that's something that's tangible and that's going to be a part of the union for the next 20 or 30 years or however long it takes before we do another whole renovation like we did in 1999.
All right, thank you. That was actually a student question, as well as this next one will also be a student question from somebody in the stream. A large portion of next year's board will have little idea of how the board, and specifically budgeting, works in a normal year. Do you see this as an opportunity or a challenge? How will you approach this problem?
Yeah, so I think I definitely want to kind of maintain the board members that we've had. I know that we have a lot of people that are seniors and are going to be graduating, but I think something that we tried this year was what we like to call board buddies. So basically, it wasn't like bigs and littles with Greek organizations. There wasn't any kind of power structure with that, but we would say, okay, well, this person is more experienced with the board, and this person is somewhat new. So if we can kind of pair them together, not only will the new person hopefully feel a little more at home, they'll at least know a couple people instead of kind of not really knowing anyone except maybe if they have like one or two friends that they sit with, but they'll have somebody to go to. So if I'm new on the board and I know that my board buddy is somebody who's been on the board for 3 years or so, if I have a question on how budgeting works or anything like that, I can text them, because it's a friendship. It's not necessarily a work relationship, and it can be so much more than that. So I think that's something that I definitely want to continue, and I think that's something that's kind of going to help with all of the new members that we will have. And I think that kind of helps break the ice between groups. So something that we really tried to focus on was making sure that it wasn't the cabinet versus the rest of the board, like we might have seen in years past. So myself, Anissa, Nate, we all had board buddies. I believe all of our board buddies were freshmen except for Nate's. Nate had a couple sophomores and juniors. But we tried to make sure that we didn't kind of set ourselves apart from the rest of the board, and I really want to continue that. I want to make sure that if somebody has a question on budgeting, they don't feel uncomfortable shooting me a text or sending me a Snapchat message or a Slack message or whatever, being like, hey, I don't know how this works. Can you explain this to me? I'm definitely willing to do that, and I really hope that I can create an environment in which people are comfortable asking those questions and being able to get answers from myself, the rest of my cabinet, and the rest of the board as a whole.
All right, thank you. And that's, of course, something that we do like very much as student government. A follow-up question a little. How do you plan on building upon that Board Buddies initiative in further years? You mentioned continuing, but is there plans to improve upon it?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is going to be seeing what people like and what people dislike about it. I think it worked well. I don't know that very many people had issues with it. Going forward, if somebody has suggestions on how we can improve it, I definitely want to take that into consideration and kind of build upon that. It doesn't need to be a static thing that I kind of make once and then just leave it as is and never touch again. I think it's definitely going to be something that I can build upon and continue to work on improving.
All right, thank you. The next question is, what would be your biggest weakness as president of the union?
Yeah, so as I said before, I think I have a tendency to be a little headstrong, and I kind of have to force myself to take a step back and really consider everything. So I'll continue to do that, and I'll work with my cabinet to make sure if somebody thinks that I'm going to be making a rash decision or kind of rushing something that shouldn't be rushed, they're empowered to speak out and say, Yassine, hold on. I know that this is a big issue and we want to worry about this, but just take a minute. Let's think it out and then plan our next steps and then go from there.
All right, first things first, my apologies. I asked that question twice. Second thing second, what's your favorite color?
My favorite color is, I would say, burgundy. Kind of for a weird reason. My fire department had this really specific burgundy color that all the walls in our break room were colored. So that was kind of my second family growing up, and I think that's just always had really positive memories attached to it.
All right, thank you. I had a further question. What are the opposite of what your biggest weakness is at PU? What do you think your biggest strength will be as president of the union?
Yeah, so I think I'm very willing to be a strong advocate for the student body, and I'm very willing to kind of put myself out there and speak out, even if I don't necessarily think that it's going to be best for my personal goals and aspirations. And I definitely want to continue that as PU. I think as president of the union, I want to make sure that I'm representing students and I'm taking their kind of thoughts and opinions into consideration and not just making decisions based upon what I think or what the people that I'm close to think. Because at the end of the day, no matter how hard I try, the majority of my friends are going to be from my class here. They're going to be within my major, or they're going to be within related majors. They're not going to, like, I'm not going to have too many grad students or PhD students telling me what their opinions are on things or what the class of 2025 thinks about things. I don't know that I'm going to have those opportunities to interact with too many people outside of my friend group. So I really want to make a strong effort to ensure that I'm taking everybody's thoughts into consideration and making sure that I'm representing everybody that I can.
All right, thank you. To build upon that a little bit, what would you think be the biggest priority for you in this coming year if you were elected?
Definitely rebuilding clubs and Greek organizations. We've definitely seen clubs start to shrink and Greek organizations start to shrink, and I definitely want to address that with marketing. I definitely think that there's going to be a very good opportunity to do that, and a lot of people coming out of the pandemic are going to be really excited to get to be able to see people again and actually have real events for once and not be stuck in their dorm room watching their professors lecture on Zoom and then like studying and going to bed and that's it. So I think we have a huge opportunity to market our clubs and to make sure that people are aware of all of the opportunities and all of the things that they can do at RPI. So I really want to make sure that we take advantage of that, and we not only make sure that we don't lose any clubs due to low membership, but that we can increase club membership and club participation even more than we have in years past.
All right, Thank you. I mentioned earlier, I asked a question earlier about your impact, and you mentioned the first floor renovations, the union. However, that was as you mentioned, that is still ongoing. What would be your biggest impact, do you think, that you had that was completely seen through?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would definitely say probably the feminine hygiene products in all of the union bathrooms. That is an issue that I really am proud of being able to address and being able to kind of make sure and see through to the end. I definitely want to make sure that we kind of don't lose that. I want to make sure that those hygiene products are still available in all union facilities, not only the union and the Mueller Center, but also the other facilities, so the 87 gym and the Playhouse. And outside of that, I want to make sure that we have all of those things throughout campus. I know that that's been an issue. They were recently taken out of the Folsom Library. I mean, I say recently, I believe it was last year. I haven't been on campus, as you can imagine, since I'm on my away semester. But I really want to make sure that we have all of those things available throughout campus, and we're kind of making sure that everybody has access to them, not only in the union, but everywhere.
All right, thank you. And that does serve that feminine hygiene products, as mentioned earlier by Kate, and was mentioned heavily in your platform statement. Is there any plans on expanding that project to beyond just feminine hygiene products as well? They're of course very, very important, but say any support for disabled individuals on campus or anything of the sort that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to make sure that I have kind of a virtual comment box. So if anybody has an issue that kind of affects them, we can look at that. And that's something that we tried to do with the business operations committee, and we saw was really effective. But I want to kind of expand that to the rest of the board. So if anybody has an issue, if they're disabled and they have an issue with the kind of campus access, or if there are really any issues, they can kind of have a place to anonymously send a message and have us look at it and say, how can we help? How can we fix this issue? um, because at the end of the day, I'm able-bodied, I'm a man, I don't necessarily run into issues that other people on campus are going to run into and are going to affect them. So it's really important that we make sure that we're listening to the concerns of the student body and addressing them.
All right, thank you. As I am also an able-bodied man, I am in the same position. Further, you mentioned essentially what you were just talking about. There was a comment box for Business Operations Committee on next to the Student Government Suite, actually, over the past couple of years. I don't believe it's still there. I haven't been on campus in a while. So you mentioned a virtual version. Is there any, how do you plan on getting that to people?
So part of my platform is making sure that the student body is aware of all of the actions that I'm taking and that student government as a whole is taking. To that end, I hope to send an email once a month. Most likely, I don't want to send it every couple weeks. I don't want to kind of spam people too much, but I want to make sure that everybody is aware of what actions we're taking. So I think it would definitely be good to kind of include that maybe at the end of each of those emails. So if there are any issues, it's there. They can have a place where they can reference it and they can be like, oh, it's in Yassine's email. I can search Yassine's name and then it's right there. And then they can fill that out and we can see from there what responses we get and work to address them.
All right, thank you. A further build-up question on that, as something you mentioned earlier about a strong leadership team with the Grand Marshal and the President of the Union. How do you plan on working together with the Grand Marshal in capabilities that some of what you have mentioned have been almost under the Grand Marshal, but are also under yourself? So, if there's any conflict of interest in duties, how will you decide? How will you try and handle it?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is having a working relationship with the Grand Marshal and having a friendly relationship. Um, if there is an issue that's sort of under my purview and sort of under the Grand Marshal's purview, I think it's really important that we kind of work together to address it. I don't think you don't want to step on any toes. You don't want to set bad precedents or kind of harm relationships. You really want to make sure that you're working collaboratively. And I think that's definitely something that I'll be able to do going forward.
All right, thank you. One more question about your platform. Specifically, you mentioned moving towards trying to move towards a more of a student-led union in its entirety in your platform statement. Could you build upon that?
Yeah, so I think having a student-run union is certainly important for professional development reasons, and because it kind of offers an opportunity for people to kind of experience what leadership roles are like in a little bit more of a low stress environment. But in addition to that, I really think it's important that students are working to make and vet decisions that will affect other students. So for example, up until 2012, I believe, changes to the handbook were approved by student government, and then the dean of students would add them to the handbook. So the dean of students would write up those changes, but student government would have a chance to review them and say, hey, we don't really like this, we don't like this, we want to see this changed. And that kind of ended in 2012. So I think it's really important that we kind of work towards moving back to that, and have kind of student government as a whole able to look at things and help make decisions that are going to affect the rest of the student body.
All right, I am having some technical issues on my end. 1 second. All right, I am having some technical issues on my end. 1 second.
Yeah, I think we can potentially jump into the undergrad council questions.
If you don't mind, my apologies. I'm going to ask one more question of the President of the Union. I would like to apologize. My internet cut for a second, which is one of the problems of online. Yassine, so one question came up in the debates question form that was sent up, is often student government projects require collaboration across all branches of student government in order to be effective. Do you have any plans to increase communication and collaboration within student government, not just with the Grand Marshal? And if so, how?
Yeah, so I think the reason that the executive board has been able to be so effective and kind of run so well is because at the end of the day, we do serve the student body, but we're really a family, and we really have those kind of close personal relationships. For example, I hang out with a lot of people from the executive board from years past. I'm actually in California staying with a former member of student government, just as part of my work internship. So I think the biggest thing is making sure that it's not just a working relationship, it's really a personal relationship, and we're able to form those personal connections and those friendships and have that networking and that network of support. So I think moving forward, that's definitely something that I want to work on. I want to make sure that undergrad council, grad council, student senate, and the e-board kind of are all on friendly terms and all know each other. Obviously, there are a lot of people in student government as a whole, so I don't know that it's going to be possible to have as close-knit of a relationship as you're able to have with the executive board. But I think it's still really important that I know everyone on student government and they know me. If somebody has an issue, they can come up to me and they can come up to other members of the e-board and vice versa. And I think part of having good collaboration is having those relationships. If somebody has an issue with the executive board, so if a senator has some specific club issue, they should know the people on the executive board well enough to be like, hey, quick question about X, Y, or Z, or how this process works or whatever, and really have that relationship to be able to do that. So I think that's the biggest way that I can help improve collaboration as a student government as a whole, and that's what I hope to do as PU.
All right, thank you. And again, my apologies for the internet problems. And thank you once again for coming to this debate and for joining us. Evan, you are free to take it away for undergraduate president.
Thank you so much, Keenan. Thank you for leading those two debates. We will now be moving on to the undergraduate president debates. So our two candidates will be alternating between the two. We'll start with some introductory statements. So we can start with you, Harshal. If you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your platform, we can go from there.
Certainly, Evan, but before I begin, I'd like to explain an occurrence that happened just 24 hours ago. My first interaction out of the quarantine after I'd taken a shuttle, and this experience during the shuttle from Hudson Valley. So I proceeded to go onto a bus because I'm a sophomore at Hudson Valley, and I was the only person in the shuttle, and the shuttle driver proceeded to take off his mask. And for whatever reason, I froze in panic, and for 10 to 15 minutes, he proceeded to engage in me about a conversation about why the pandemic was a conspiracy, why people shouldn't be wearing face masks, why Chinese immigrants and politicians in this country conspired this entire pandemic in order to dismiss the president of the United States. And I was astonished and taken aback and very much panicked at the time. And the unfortunate circumstance was that I had no one to report to until 24 hours later when I talked to Dr. Potts, the director of the union. And that has very much been my experience as a sophomore at RPI, having to deal with staff and workers, third-party contractors with the administration in order to somehow establish some line of COVID violation reporting. And so with that, my name is Harshal Patel. I'm the class of 2023 president. And as I alluded to before, one of the central points or themes of my platform is mental health and pandemic safety actions. As the class of 2023 president, I recently addressed in a Senate meeting a petition that I created to address food waste, mental health, and staff COVID violations, and appeared before the Senate to describe the situations by which residential students live and still currently live. In terms of student advocacy, I created the Sophomore Housing Committee to foster communication between students and the administration, and motioned to create the Arch Task Force within the Undergraduate Council, where I served as the first Arch Task Force undergraduate chair to prepare sophomores for the Arch Away and Arch Summer and Arch Away semesters, which they will be taking relatively soon and are currently registering for. In terms of diversity and inclusion, I've pursued multiple avenues of creating committees. The Underrepresented Students Committee of the classes of 2023 and the classes of 2024 organized fundraising workshops in order to address issues within our community regarding the Black community. And I had the privilege of working with the NAACP president, Renee Powell, in conversations with other leaders from Black student organizations and clubs, such as the National Society of Black Engineers and the Black Students Alliance, and working towards a communication. And one of the goals of my platform is to establish an NAACP student chapter, which hasn't been done since 1935, since the establishment of the Troy branch.
I'm gonna have to cut you off. Apologies. Just as a reminder, we're gonna keep it to 2 minutes per response. But
Of course. And lastly, I'll say Arch career development and interclass communication are also the central points of my platform.
thank you for sharing, and apologies to hear about your experience there. We can move on now to Rhea to talk a little bit about yourself and your platform as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Evan. So, hi, my name is Rhea, and I'm running for undergrad president. Since Evan graduated in December, I was elected and have been undergraduate president. And in this past semester, I've been able to learn the ins and outs of the position, as well as start on a few projects that I'd like to continue to work on, such as Arch Task Force. As a member of the women's soccer team and as an RPI student, I feel it's important to continue to push for communication from administration and work with the class councils to address class-related issues. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Rhea. So we'll go back to you, Rhea, to start with this first question. Which part of your platform is the highest priority for you?
Yeah, so I think the highest priority for me right now is communication with administration. Recently, we faced an issue with quarantine where students were initially told that quarantine would be ending on March 17th. The entire week I'd been reaching out to administration to try and find out if this quarantine would be extended, if this quarantine is extended, by how many days, and when will an announcement be sent out to those who have been waiting for 2 weeks to be let out. And we didn't receive any communication until the 17th, where our students found out that they would be stuck in dorms for another 3-4 days. And I felt that was unacceptable. And honestly, moving forward, I think just spending more time and communicating with administration that this is a concern that we need to fix rather urgently, because this is not the first time it's happened. This has happened plenty of times in the past. And yeah, so I think that's the most important part of my platform.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'll ask the same question to Harshal. What is the most important or most high priority issue on your platform?
So the highest priority of my platform right now is, as I alluded to before, mental health and pandemic safety. And that sort of ties in with the recent interactions and the recent happenings and occurrences of the United States. And so by those standards, I'll also say diversity and inclusion. Since the start of the pandemic, politicians across the United States have made it a point to associate the COVID-19 virus with China, referring it to as the Kung Flu or the China virus. This racist rhetoric and behavior predates the start of the global pandemic, and its recent amplification has caused increased perpetration of hate crimes against people of Asian descent in our communities, and the legitimate fear and concerns of AAPI students have fallen on deaf ears so far, and so it is the responsibility of student leaders and administrators to give our community a voice of unity and reassurance, and to create support systems for Asian and Asian American students of these turbulent times, addressing things such as mental health, providing staff and counseling for not only undergraduate students, but also international undergraduate students that may not have as strong a communicative grasp and things of this nature.
Awesome, thank you. So we'll go back to you, Harshal, for another question. The next question is, in your eyes, what is the role of the undergraduate council and the class councils?
So the goal of the undergraduate council, as stated in the Rensselaer Constitution, is to be a representational branch under the Rensselaer Union Constitution. And in that vein, things such as student advocacy, diversity and inclusion, and interclass communication are necessary in order to facilitate dialogues between class councils to transfer knowledge and experience within the undergraduate council and other branches of student government, and to improve the knowledge of class budgets by addressing fundraising workshops, financial literacy, and event budgeting within the UC. Most recently, we passed a motion within the UC to create the Arts Task Force, and this has been a hands-on, comprehensive undergraduate council project that requires participation from upperclassmen that have already taken the arts summer semester, and most recently the juniors that have operated in an online capacity during the pandemic, and currently for the sophomores right now. And what we've been doing so far is holding meetings in order to establish communication within the UC to prepare for things such as professional development. We plan to have a summer career fair this arts summer semester for people that missed out on the spring career fair. And it is essential that students are represented in terms of internships and co-op opportunities. In that same vein, we worked with the class of 2022 Senator William P. in order to establish a software called Nexer, which will allow students in the upcoming summer semester to register for classes as well as join online study sessions during the arts summer semester. And this body of knowledge and transitional experience will require freshman participation as well as they prepare in the next year. So that is the premise of my platform in terms of student advocacy and arts career development and interclass communication.
Awesome. So I'll ask the same question to you, Rhea. In your eyes, what is the role of the undergraduate and the class councils?
Yeah, so generally speaking, so historically, I guess, the class council's main job has been to prepare events and do event planning and budgeting for the class council and for all of the members of the student of their cohort. The direction I've kind of been taking UC in is to also advocate for students in their class-related issues. So currently for the freshmen and sophomores, that's been issues related to quarantine. For sophomores specifically, that's been arts-related issues. For seniors, that has been senior week and commencement planning. So overall, the job of the undergraduate council is to provide feedback and help to other class councils to aid them in their efforts. And for class councils, it's to plan events and promote class unity, as well as gather information from their class to address issues that are pertinent to that particular cohort.
Awesome. This next question will start with you again, Rhea. Similar vein to a lot of the points you just brought up, which is, how do you plan to advocate for and amplify the voices of the class councils and of the entire student body?
Yeah, so one thing that the class councils of 2023 and 2024 in particular have been really good about this semester is voicing their concerns, especially when it comes to the food within quarantine. We've seen at the last Senate meeting, there were 180 participants, and many, I'd say most of those people were freshmen. So I think the freshman class has done a really good job of bringing their voices together, and UC, in conjunction with them, has taken those concerns and pushed them to kind of like the next level, bring them to administration, gather those key voices in one place and address issues that are related to each class.
Great. We'll pass it to you, Harshal. How do you plan to advocate and amplify the voices of the class councils and the student body?
So one of the immediate ways that we can amplify the voices of the class councils in the coming art semester and then moving on to the fall semester is to work actively with the administration in order to assist class presidents, as I've stated before, and class councils in communicating the needs of their classes to relevant administrators and the branches of student government. I can speak as the current sophomore and class president that our registration for the Arch summer semester has begun. And one of the projects that we pursue right now is working with the ALAC tutors and the sophomore learning assistants to distribute knowledge about how to register for courses, what academic support resources are available during the Arch summer semester, and what to look for in terms of professional development and career building. Similarly, we've been cooperating with the director of the Arch and the directors of the CCPD, Jade Felder and Philip Bruce, in order to plan out workshops and town halls to answer students' questions about career and internship opportunities. Matthew Olschlager is the associate dean from the Maine department, was also at the town hall and mentioned a list of companies by cohort and by major that actively sought out communication and actively participated in the spring career fairs and helped people to acquire internships for the co-ops and opportunities. As for the freshman class, at the last Senate meeting, the classes of 2023 and the classes of 2024 especially voiced their concerns about the pandemic and current living conditions in the quarantine. And hopefully moving forward, the Institute will work with the administrators basically to implement infrastructure within dorms that allows leftover food to be donated safely. As I alluded to before, a helpline for reporting COVID-19 safety violations and efficiently for students living on campus and off-campus housing and wellness days where students can have breaks from the regularly scheduled classes. And the final thing I do have to say is that Dr. Leslie Lawrence came to the last UC meeting and spoke about the vaccination procedures that we are likely to face in the Arch summer semester. The more likely it is that late April and early May, vaccination distribution will begin. And as soon as we have 70% vaccination rate, we'll have a herd immunity for the Arch summer semester, and it will be likely that we will not have to go into quarantine, and we'll be fully in person again by the fall semester. So we'll work towards the student health center and pursuing more counseling services for students, as well as installing a vaccination expert to keep people up to date in terms of where to get their vaccine, where to schedule an appointment, and to be prepared for the Arch summer semester and fall semesters.
All right, thank you. One thing I will note is please try and stay somewhat on topic for the questions, within reason, I would say. So I'll have another question right back for you, Harshal. What would you see as your own leadership strengths and weaknesses?
So one of my strengths as a leader is being able to network with other branches of student government, as well as to reach out to other student leaders across colleges and universities. In these past couple of weeks, there has been a highlighted necessary need to address mental wellness days and mental health and pandemic safety. And I had the opportunity to speak to student government leaders from Northeastern University and Bentley University about how they worked with their administration in order to incorporate wellness days. And we'll continue working with them through the student government, Boston Collegiate Intercollegiate Government, and reaching out to Harvard University and MIT to continue that discussion. That's in that same vein, I participated in numerous meetings with administrators in order to organize town halls for the classes of 2023, ranging from financial aid, remote learning on campus, and most recently, the Arch Away in Arch and the Arch summer semesters, and can basically communicate with directors from different departments in order to answer pressing needs. One of my weaknesses as a student leader is I find myself in very ambitious situations. I like to take on these projects and like to cooperate across different spans in terms of student government and student outreach. And I find myself, as was previously mentioned in the GM discussion, the need to surround myself with practical and realistic leaders and representatives within student government to accomplish these goals in such a state. And so hopefully in my position as undergraduate president, if I were to be elected, I will work with the class councils, their class presidents and vice presidents who are voting members of the undergraduate council to not only get their feedback, but in order to conduct work with the Arch Undergraduate Task Force Committee to set realistic goals and planning in this immediate Arch summer semester.
Great. So now we'll ask the same question to you, Rhea. What do you see as your own leadership strengths and weaknesses?
So I'd say one of my biggest strengths overall has been to know when I need to when I need to ask for help. Oftentimes, especially in this past semester, as UP, I've received a number of questions relating to topics that I just don't have a lot of background about. So rather than pretending I know what's happening, I've reached out to the people who I know are more well-informed about those issues and learn some more background and see if I'm able to help in addressing those issues and concerns that I have. Related, but slightly separately, a weakness that I have is being able to delegate work. Sometimes when I hear about a project or I hear a student is facing an issue, I try to reach out to the appropriate resources and lead that project by myself when I don't necessarily have the time for it, and I just get a little bit carried away with it. So I think moving forward, I'd like to work on delegating some of that work to other people who are passionate about that same issue. So reaching out and working with more people on a topic, I think, often leads to better results.
Great, thank you. All right, so we'll ask another question for you, Rhea. So the class and undergrad councils have had many traditions, such as hockey nights, Grow Your Future Day, Senior Week, and many, many more, which have not really been possible over the last year and a half due to COVID. So how do you plan to ensure that these traditions are not lost if you are elected, either by re-implementing them or other ways making sure they're not lost?
Yeah, so I remember we'd spoken about this a few weeks ago, and traditions in RPI are something that I think most students don't even know exist, especially the freshmen and sophomores who haven't had a chance to really experience them for themselves. This week is GM week, and I had a freshman ask me earlier this week, what is GM week? And that is something that I can't imagine as a freshman. Obviously, as a junior, I've seen it in person. So I think moving forward, I'd love to bring new life to the traditions that used to be so vibrant and bring life to this campus. Hockey night or hockey line, when there would be people lined up throughout the streets. GM week, when there would be celebrations through the night. I know all of these aren't possible right now, but I think informing the students that these used to be traditions at RPI and they've kind of been lost along the way. I think by letting people know the possibilities of what we could do with these traditions, bring new ones in, bring old ones back, I think that would be really exciting, and more people would want to get involved in these initiatives to bring back tradition to RPI.
Great. We'll ask the same question to you, Harshal. In the last year and a half, we haven't been able to complete a lot of traditions like Hockey Night, Grow Your Future, Senior Week, etc. How will you ensure these traditions are not lost?
So I appreciate you asking, Evan, this question about traditions within the RPI student government and the undergraduate council. But one thing that wasn't mentioned was the class trees that have to be planted freshman year. And I can say firsthand, as a member of the class of 2023, we weren't actually able to plant our class trees because of the nature of the pandemic and when everyone was sent home, which affected the timeline. And so one of the things that we have to realistically pursue as an undergraduate council and working in collaboration with the class vice presidents and class presidents is that we are still very much in a pandemic setting, and we'll need to operate in limited capacities. And so I've talked recently with one of the directors of the student activities coordinator, Cameron Ann McLean, who works for the Rensselaer Union. And it is very likely that when the class tree traditions and the class tree plantings occur, hopefully in late April, gatherings of less than 9 need to occur within each of the class of 2023 and class of 2024 councils in order to plant their trees, in order to have any digital semblance of unity. WebEx recording will need to be provided, and other considerations need to be made, such as budgeting for the event, picking out the specific trees, plaque and bench and quote that are associated with such a tradition, as well as attendance. And so in that very much setting, we hold into the nature of the traditions. I know that the classes of 2022 and the most recent class of 2021, which will be graduating after the end of this semester, have had their hockey nights and have had their traditions of donating a class gift. And we'll very much be working as the undergraduate president to ensure that these traditions pass on from the upcoming class of 2022 senators and their experiences, and transition on to the class of 2023 in order to facilitate such interclass communication and dialogue. And in that very same sense, when the class of 2025, believe it or not, enters as freshmen in the fall semester where the pandemic will sort of clear, the nuances will change. We will very much operate in an in-person capacity, and we'll still have to plan for class trees, hockey nights, tree gifts, etc.
Great, thank you. So another question for you, Harshal, to start off. This is the first of a couple more internal focused questions. So in the last couple of years, in my opinion, the undergrad council officers have not been utilized in a significant way and have not played a significant role in the undergrad council. What plans do you have for the officer positions, which are secretary, treasurer, publicity director, and then especially vice president?
So that's a great question. And I know in our experiences now in the last couple of semesters, we've sort of had to table the undergraduate council vice president, and sort of what's been happening right now in Rhea's term as the current UC president, is that all of these roles and responsibilities have to be taken up when the officer positions can't be filled by the UC president. And so one of the things that we need to address is communication within the undergraduate population in terms of advertising and interest in student government. I know that we recently made Senate liaison appointments and other internal appointments. Tallulah Patch is the current class of 2024 senator that serves as the UC Senate liaison, and that position is an example of how we can clearly reach out to underclassmen and upperclassmen that are heavily involved in student government in order to fill up those positions, which I intend to address for secretary, treasurer, etc. I know that from the class of 2023, Faiza Rabi, who is currently a class of 2023 presidential candidate, serves as the executive board and undergraduate council liaison, and very much communicates with the e-board and the UC in order to fill those types of positions. And so in that very same vein, we'll have a diverse set of students. We'll communicate, as I said before, and likely fill in those positions which we seem necessary. And secretary, we haven't had a functioning secretary for these past 2 semesters. And as a result, attendance wasn't taken. And so all the crucial meeting informations and informational documents and records of attendance were not preserved. And that is something, an immediate action that I'd like to take if elected UC president.
Awesome. We can move on to the same question for you, Rhea. In the past few years, UC officers have been underutilized. What plans do you have for the secretary, treasurer, publicity director, and vice president?
Yeah, so to address secretary, treasurer, and PR, those roles, as soon as I step into office, will definitely be recruited for. We'll send out applications to get those positions filled. My goals for those particular roles is for the treasurer from UC to be trained in the role, not just for UC, but also for the positions of each of the class council treasurers, and for there to be weekly or most likely monthly meetings with each of the class treasurers to catch up with them, see how it's going, see if there are any questions, concerns that need to be addressed, or that just need a little bit more fixing, because especially I was my class treasurer for about 2.5 years before I became UP. And in that time, I learned so much in the role. But when I stepped in my freshman year, it was a lot of trial and error, and it was a lot of asking the other treasurers to see how they're doing their job. So my goal for those roles is for the people in UC holding those positions to regularly be in communication with these same roles in each of the class councils to make sure there's no huge questions or concerns that aren't being addressed because no one knows where to go.
Awesome, thank you. So I'll be asking another question for you, Rhea. What is the biggest issue you see with the undergrad council currently, and how will you work to resolve it?
So I don't know if this is necessarily a concern, but it feels like there's a little bit of a split between underclassmen and upperclassmen right now in UC. And this is widely because right now the underclassmen are facing a very unique situation of being under, I guess, everyone is watching them, pub safety, people on campus. Right now as a junior, I'm not going to in-person classes. I don't have to deal with dining halls and meal plans and things of that sort and housing. So I think freshmen and sophomores, so the underclassmen right now really relate to themselves, and upperclassmen are sort of struggling to understand the struggles that they're going through. I think in the future, more collaboration on inter-class projects would be something that will bring all of the classes back together in a unified way. But I think just getting out of this pandemic, making it out of COVID is going to be a huge, huge step in the right direction for everyone to work together on one project, hopefully as UC, which we've already started planning. But yeah, that's kind of my vision for that, for all the classes to be unified, hopefully soon, but worst case in the fall when COVID is gone, hopefully.
Great, thank you. So I'll ask the same question to you, Harshal. What is the biggest issue you see with the UC currently, and how will you work to resolve it?
So, as was stated previously, one of the immediate problems that I see within the undergraduate council is the lack of communication, or the perceived lack of communication, between the upperclassmen and the underclassmen councils, and that struggle pertaining to the needs of freshmen and sophomores and juniors and seniors is sort of a false dichotomy, in the sense that communication is required to address certain needs. And this goes back to the last Senate meeting where 180 freshmen and sophomores basically participated in addition to the Student Senate to voice their concerns. And I feel as though this communication could be bridged if communications and reports and testimonies from freshmen and sophomores are current issues being discussed. And one of the mechanisms that could provide for such dialogue is to bolster up the undergraduate council's role as the representational branch, constantly in contact with their cohort and constituency, in order to bring up questions such as mental health and safety, questions such as food waste, and questions such as mental wellness days. And in that same vein, one of the ways that we can bridge this sort of gap in interclass communication is to work towards, in the immediate short term, to implement wellness days, which, if I believe, is an upperclassman and an underclassman united front as of this point. And currently one of the projects within the undergraduate council is to have outdoor screenings. And I know that sounds sort of ridiculous, but the RAs basically are capable as of this point, and the residence life and first year experience have been contacted and will pursue such options to allow residents in their halls and dormitories to screen with their friends and watch sort of movies. In that same vein, one of the ideas that I did brainstorm with the other student government associations of Northeastern and Bentley University was an outline for wellness days, where there were such programs as having athletics socially distanced and having outdoor events with the current staff and the NCAA coaching staff, which currently serve as only testing for the Armory or workers in facilities and health staff workers, as well as programs to have a sustainability art show where people are given paintings and drawings at the current testing center, and to have that work prominently displayed after they sort of sit down and work towards it and have it prominently displayed around the campus as a sort of way to address mental health.
Awesome. So that is all of the pre-written questions. We have another few student questions for both of you. The first one is the same as during the Grand Marshal time. What is something you admire about your opponent? And we'll be starting with you, Harshal.
So one of the things that I admire about Rhea as she sits as the current undergraduate council president is her ability to systematize very correctly the administrators, as she said so eloquently before in one of her responses. It's a matter of identifying when you don't know the answer to a specific question that somebody in a different cohort might ask, but know which relevant administrator to ask. And so if you have any questions about the arts, you very much send an email to Jade Felder, who's the arts director. If you have a question about student health and mental health, you reach out to Dr. Leslie Lawrence or Dr. Kevin Redden, the directors and assistant associate directors of the Student Health Center. And very much having that capability as an undergraduate president and as the undergraduate council, which is a representational branch, allows for you to facilitate interclass communication and address communication, the needs of students, catering to their needs and answering them so responsively and sort of bridging that gap, that perceived gap that we have now in the middle of this pandemic.
Great. So now the same question for you, Rhea. What do you admire about your opponent?
I admire a lot of things about Harshal. He's taken a really huge stance in his class council, and he's been really active and led a really large number of initiatives that are very important to his class, and I definitely appreciate that. He's not afraid to send emails, and he's not afraid to reach out to people who need, who have been asking questions. He's great at following up. So yeah, I think Harshal's done a great job as 2023 president.
Awesome. So now for another question, we'll start with you on this one, Rhea. As the class councils have grown into their role in advocacy, there are increasing overlaps between the role of UC and Senate. And how will you address that overlap? And do you think that the undergrad president should be an advocacy role?
So I think undergrad president is a role that's kind of shifting towards student advocacy, but more in class-specific issues, because undergrad council historically has been a place where budgets have been passed. And I think right now more than ever, there needs to be a place where class-specific issues can be addressed. So we ran into this when we were creating Arch Task Force. Initially, the idea that I'd had and spoken to Advaith, the current GM, about was, where should we house Arch Task Force? Because historically it's been part of Senate, but it feels like there would be a better home for it within UC. So we spoke about it, and overall we discussed that we would be having Senate and e-board liaisons within Arch Task Force to be able to communicate what's happening in UC's Arch Task Force with members of Senate. And of course, everyone is welcome to join these committees between councils and between bodies of student government. So I think just training our class councils to know what their role is, and training members of each committee in being able to share that information with their respective part of student government is going to be very helpful in the future for bridging these gaps and communicating what's happening in each body of student government with another successfully and effectively.
Great, thank you. So we'll ask this one to Harshal as well. So as class councils grow into their advocacy role, there's an overlap between UC and Senate. How will you address that overlap, and should the UP be an advocacy role?
So one of the most recent Senate meetings that occurred was exactly, as Ray said, deciding whether the Arch undergraduate task force, or the Arch task force, would be housed in the undergraduate council, and a motion was brought up to make it a joint committee. And one of the problems that was addressed in terms of advocacy and representation was that allowing for a joint committee of the Senate and the undergraduate council would allow for greater participation. And what has been the occurrence in the last couple of weeks is that in our most recent Arch Task Force meetings, which are currently housed in the undergraduate council, there have only been meetings of the current class of 2023 presidents and vice presidents, and the class of 2024 president and vice presidents. And one of the things of consideration is that in terms of advocacy and and sort of representation, as you alluded to earlier in your question, is being able to reach out to relevant administrators, as well as delegating roles when communications about the current sophomores' needs need to be addressed. And one of the benefits, I suppose, of having an advocacy stance, and in that same vein, having a joint Senate and undergraduate joint committee, would be to allow for greater participation of class councils that are very capable of representing the students, but also to have a dimensional or sort of legalistic depth provided by Senate participation. And in terms of reaching out and emailing relevant administrators, as well as formulating effective policies towards the Arch summer semester. In addition, one of the roles that could be resurrected in terms of advocacy, in terms of the undergraduate council, but keeping it primarily within, is resurrecting the position of the class treasurer to hold sort of fundraising workshops. And one of my immediate goals as the undergraduate council president is to work with Black student clubs and organizations currently to install an NAACP student chapter at RPI, which hasn't been created since the initial foundation of the Troy branch since 1935. And very much in the vein of advocacy and representation, putting together fundraising workshops and fundraising events, reaching out to the RBLX initiative in order to pursue the strategic plan and getting this membership off the ground, and reaching out to the undergraduate student population and the community at large at RPI in order to signal that, hey, we very much understand the needs of diversity and inclusion on our campus, and we very much advocate and support your representational branch of student government.
Great. So another question, and this one will start with you, Harshal. So to kind of touch back on the discussion about UC officers being underutilized, what strategies will each of you use to delegate work, and other efforts for your councils, your officers, and individual class councils to delegate work?
So one of the recent criticisms that I've sort of had in terms of participation within the class council, and of course hosting these fundraising workshops within the classes of 2023 and the class of 2024, was sort of participation. There was ample advertising and ample event planning associated towards the classes of 2023 and the classes of 2024, but we found that only in hosting these types of events that often undergraduate students didn't have time, or basically couldn't participate in the week during these planned fundraising events. And so one of the goals of the fundraising, or one of the fundraising goals that could be pursued by an undergraduate class treasurer, is to work with the class councils in hosting fundraising events for their classes, and to have structured meetings each week in order to send out emails to relevant administrators, and to overall plan effective fundraising events and student outreach during an academic semester. And in a similar vein to class secretaries, I know that in the undergraduate council, we currently do not have a secretary, and the meeting minutes are obviously taken back, and we obviously rely on the current UC members, not officers, in order to record that. So one of the resources of the roles of an assigned, I suppose, secretary would be to establish a Google Drive for the UC from year to year, to take meeting minute notes, and to compile relevant administrative information and sort of contacts as we continue our role in sort of advocacy and interclass and administrative communication. And finally, in terms of public relations, I do believe that there is an appetite for RPI students and the RPI community to reach out to other student leaders in the surrounding Albany and Troy area. And one of the roles that could be modified in terms of public, and sort of the public publicity director, is not only to advertise events for the undergraduate population, but to reach out to surrounding universities and serve as a sort of public ambassador in order to gain relevant knowledge from other student leaders within our area in the 21st century.
Great. So then we'll ask this question to Rhea as well. What strategies will you use to delegate work to your officers and the councils better?
Yeah, so I think before we can delegate those roles need to be, people in those roles need to be trained, and those actual positions need to be well defined. and there hasn't really been much of a precedence for it. So I think sitting down and looking at everything that needs to be done and then being able to distribute that information will be a very effective strategy to be able to utilize those members. So in terms of treasurer, we this semester weren't able to come up with a UC sponsored event. We're currently working on that. So as soon as elections are over, hopefully we can get a treasurer in that role, understand how the budget works, and help guide the UC in how we should best spend our money and help plan in those events in whatever way is financially feasible for us as a UC. In terms of a secretary, definitely their role consists of taking meeting minutes and organizing documents. But in addition to that, it's another voice in the UC. And I think being able to let students in UC know about what has happened in previous meetings is a very valuable resource that we have in a secretary. And then finally with PR, as soon as we have events that are planned, it'll be very useful to have someone be able to figure out a plan for distributing information about events that we're having, the best ways to reach each community and each, I guess, cohort the best in communication with the other class council PR people. So I think once we are able to get those roles filled, we'll be able to start delegating work and planning nice events and things like that for the undergrad community.
Great. Thank you, Rhea, and thank you, Harshal, as well. That will be the last question for the UP debates. I'm actually going to be passing it back to Keenan. There were 2 additional questions for Grand Marshal that popped up, so we'll be jumping back to the GM candidates, asking those 2, and then we'll be wrapping up. Off to you, Keenan.
All right. Thank you, Evan, and thank you both of you undergraduate president candidates for participating. So let's just get right to it. So let's first ask Kate. Both candidates have mental health advocacy, both GM candidates have mental health advocacy as part of your platforms. Many previous GMs have also run a similar platform, but very few changes have materialized. How do you differentiate your strategy on this issue from the classical?
Yeah, so there are definitely 2 approaches to how we look at mental health and neurodiversity within the Institute. There's this kind of bottom-up grassroots approach, which is somewhat what's happening now. We have individual organizations like Active Minds, Autism at Rensselaer, the Union Mental Health Mondays that are all focused on mental health. But then there's also this idea of kind of a top-down approach where the highest levels of the Institute are communicating to the greater Rensselaer community that we're presenting a united front to fight for mental health. So there's parts of my platform include both of these things, and the way that I approach mental health includes both of these approaches. First of all, from a top down, I think it's very important for high-level institutes to express the importance of mental health to the students. At this point, we don't get very many communications or very much connection between all of these individual groups that are working on mental health awareness and improving our campus mental health. And there are no high-level institutional goals for accomplishing this. This is something that the current Grand Marshal Advaith is working on, and I want to kind of continue his work going forward to make sure that we get that top-down approach. Additionally, I think it's important to do a bottom-up approach. So finding these like kind of smaller issues that you can use that would in a very small way impact mental health. Firstly, I think that hiring more counselors is a really fundamentally important part of moving towards a better mental health as an institute. And additionally, I would like to encourage professors to acknowledge the inherent neurodiversity within their classrooms and to use other professors as examples of how to effectively utilize the way that each person's brain functions differently. So definitely, I think that mental health is fundamentally linked to academics. And so if we address this underlying cause of academics kind of really the format of STEM academics sometimes not really being great for certain people's thought processes and the way that they work, I think that is how we move forward to kind of better this issue in a way that we haven't really addressed it as a Senate before.
All right, thank you. I'm going to be asking the same question to you, Colleen. Both candidates both yourself and Kate have mental health advocacy as part of your platforms. Many previous GMs have also run a similar platform, but very few changes have materialized. How do you differentiate your strategy on this issue from what's gone before?
Yeah, so like Kate mentioned, the current Grand Marshal Advaith Narayan has this long-term plan in order to work with that top-down approach that is fully supported by a lot of higher administration right now. So I think going forward, that's a super beneficial thing because both students and the administration are supporting it. And if I'm elected, I will fully work to continue to see that done. And basically, this initiative is kind of centralizing all of these resources. So be it through different clubs on campus or the counseling center or just like any other initiative on campus, like bringing those all together so that we can centralize and continue promoting mental health resources. Something else I'd also like to see is bringing back the drop-in times for counseling services. This was something that started, I believe, a year or two ago. And then obviously this year, it wasn't able to be continued. I heard feedback from many students though that they were able to use these hours, and it was nice to be able to drop in and not have to schedule a formal appointment. So bringing those back would be super beneficial. I also know that the Student Life Committee has had a survey out for a bit, and we've received over 1,000 responses, which is super great. So I've started going through those a little bit, and I saw, as Kate also mentioned, it's very hard to get a time spot. Right now at the counseling center, you have to book it way in advance, and it's just very limited. So I think working towards hiring another counselor would be super beneficial once we're able to do that, because I think it's what we really need right now, especially given the current environment. It's a super important conversation that we have to have, and I'm hoping that by taking these small steps, we have a very clear goal and we can continue forward with it.
All right, thank you. And now for my second question, Colleen, we'll start with you. As was mentioned in the undergraduate president debates just a few minutes ago, there is increasing overlap between undergraduate council and Senate as undergraduate council takes on an advocacy role. How will you address that overlap?
Yeah, so this is something I mentioned in my platform. I think the relationship between Senate and the undergrad council really needs to be looked at because I don't think it should fall to one or the other. I think while Senate handles like kind of those big picture campus-wide problems, the class council is also elected and they are representatives of their constituents. So if they'd like to take that advocacy role and work on like class-specific problems, that's something that really should be like worked with. And if I'm elected, I'd like to work with the undergrad president so that we can like talk about, I guess, where exactly those like boundaries would fall so that to make sure there's not being repeated work or anything like that. And to ensure that I guess work is just super efficient. But also like I think like senators, class senators are in a unique position because while they're members of the Senate, they're also members of their class council. So I'd like to see more communication between senators and their councils in regards to projects that Senate is working on in committees and such. So I think it's super open to discussion. I'd love to see the advocacy from the class council side. And I just think it's something that has to be discussed. And I don't think that's a decision that I can make by myself. I think it's something that needs to be communicated with the undergrad council.
All right, thank you. And for the final question of the night, Kate, to repeat, as was mentioned in the undergraduate president debates just a few minutes ago, there's increasing overlap between undergraduate council and Senate as UC takes on the advocacy role. How will you address that overlap?
Yeah, so I think that a good part of the class-focused advocacy that the freshman and sophomore classes in particular have taken on is partially caused by the fact that they are in a very unique situation. You know, most people's freshman year, they're not dealing with these crazy big issues like, you know, a full pandemic and quarantine and figuring out how to get food, right? All of those things for a general freshman year are kind of understood to be taken care of. But for the freshman and sophomore class, that's just not the case. So I definitely believe that it's important to have this like very class specific advocacy. I do think that the issue with the overlap is that oftentimes the administration may not know like who to go to for a particular issue. And that can be very easily solved by kind of just keeping the communication high between the class councils and particularly the class presidents, as well as the Grand Marshal and their senators. Additionally, I think that it's helpful to have the class councils be, you know, they're all very passionate individuals. And it's definitely not my place or anybody's place to tell them, hey, don't use your passion, right? So I think that the alternative is for those issues that are impacting everybody to kind of say, okay, yeah, come and join a Senate committee and lead a project about that so that it's still focused within the Senate and it follows that model of class-based advocacy versus general advocacy without kind of, you know, ending up with too many people talking about one issue. An example of this is I actually had one of the class vice presidents approach me and talk about how they were really interested in shuttles and how they had scheduled meetings with a bunch of people to talk about shuttles. And I said, yeah, FSC actually does that. And so if you're interested in this, I can help you make those connections as FSC chair, and that way, like, you know, you're hearing from kind of one person and you get all that feedback from me. So I think that that is something that's really helpful, is encouraging class council members to join Senate committees. It will help kind of channel that passion and ensure that there's not too much overlap within the projects. Additionally, I think it's important for senators to bring forth their initiatives and their projects to their class councils beforehand. This is something that we don't see a whole ton of, but it's definitely something that we started to see more of, especially with the freshman council and the recent quarantine motion. And that initiative was handled not just by the senators, but also by the entire class council, and there was a lot of solidarity there.
All right, thank you. And this concludes the GM Week 2021 debates. For those of you that have been live in chat, we very much appreciate you. Thank you for attending. For those of you that see this recording on YouTube, on RPI TV's YouTube channel, very much thank you, and check out their other videos. And for everyone here, candidates-wise, thank you so very much, and thank you, RPI TV, for hosting these debates. Do remember to go vote Thursday, tomorrow at 9 in the morning until Saturday at 9 in the morning. You'll be getting an email about it. But thank you and good night.